The growl of a heavy-duty truck woke me before my alarm. It wasn't the gentle rumble of the morning trash collection. This was a deep, guttural sound, the kind that vibrates through your floorboards and rattles the coffee mugs in the cupboard. I swung my legs out of bed, my joints cracking a protest. 55 years old, and my body still wasn't used to sudden wake-up calls. I peered through the blinds. A rusty, oversized Ford F-350 with a flatbed was parked on the street, but its passenger-side wheels had sunk into my drought-burned front lawn, leaving greasy brown trenches in the dead grass. A man I recognized all too well slid out of the driver's side. Vince, the Homeowners Association's pet contractor. He had the kind of physique that suggested a long-term relationship with cheap beer and a deep-seated aversion to manual labor. His hair was slick with something that might have been gel, or maybe just a natural byproduct of his personality. He moved with an unearned swagger, a smirk already plastered on his face, as he strolled toward my house. I pulled on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, not bothering with shoes. The floor was cool under my bare feet as I walked to the front door. In my pocket, my fingers found the familiar, cold weight of my keys. On the ring, separate from the others, was a single heavy server key. It was obsolete, a relic from a data center I hadn't set foot in for years, but I kept it. A reminder. I opened the door just as Vince was about to knock. He barely flinched. "Morning, Alex," he said, his voice as oily as his hair. "Got a present for you." He gestured with his head toward my shed. It wasn't a big structure, just a 10 by 12 foot building at the edge of my property, but it was solid. Reinforced steel door, concrete foundation. I'd built it to last. Vince walked right past me, his boots crunching on the dry, dead grass. He pulled a fluorescent orange sticker from his clipboard and slapped it onto the metal door of the shed. The sound was like a gunshot in the morning stillness. I read the big black letters, "Notice of Demolition." Funny thing is, if you've been watching Karenology for any length of time, you probably know it's never really about the shed, is it? I walked over, my feet silent on the parched earth. The sun was already starting to bake the air, even this early. The smell of dust and hot diesel hung heavy. "You want to tell me what this is, Vince?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "New fire safety code," he chirped, turning around with that smug grin. "Unapproved structures with fortified features, quote unquote, are a fire hazard. Your bunker there, it's in violation. We're tearing it down, Monday." I just looked at him. Have you ever had someone stand on your own property and talk to you like you're a guest who has overstayed their welcome? That's not a bunker, Vince. That's the emergency supply depot for the elementary school. It's full of bottled water and first aid kits. The principal has a key. We're in the middle of a record drought and heat wave. The school needs it. He shrugged, a theatrical gesture of helplessness. "Rules are rules, pal. Homeowners Association board voted. It's gotta go." He tapped the sticker with a thick finger. "This isn't a request. It's a work order, and you're the first stop on my list." He started to walk away, then turned back. "Don't try and move the stuff out either. Interfering with a sanctioned safety procedure is another fine." He climbed back into his truck, started the engine with a roar that sent a puff of black smoke into the clean morning air, and drove off, leaving me standing there in the rising heat, the orange sticker glowing like a toxic wound on my property. I stood there for a long time. The last time I pointed out that the Emperor had no clothes, I was an OSINT analyst for a major logistics firm. I'd found a hole in their shipping network security so big you could drive a truck through it, and someone was. I wrote a report. I proved it with data. They thanked me for my diligence and fired me 3 weeks later for not being a team player. It taught me a valuable lesson. Sometimes being right is the most expensive mistake you can make. Have you ever been punished for doing the right thing? It's a special kind of poison. It makes you hesitate the next time you see something wrong. It tells you to just keep your head down. If you know that feeling, maybe hit that like button. Lets me know I'm not alone out here. I finally walked back inside, the heat of the pavement starting to sting my feet. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I sat down at my desk, the place where I now worked as a freelance consultant, tracking down digital ghosts for people who could afford the truth. My computer screen was asleep. I tapped the mouse and the screen flickered to life, showing my inbox. And there it was. An email received 3 minutes ago. The sender was the Homeowners Association's Treasury Department. The subject line read, "Urgent, violation notice and special assessment fee." The sticker on the shed was a threat. The numbers on the screen, that was a declaration of war. And I knew exactly who had just pulled the trigger. I clicked open the email, my breath caught in my throat just for a second. It's a physical reaction, you know? The kind you can't control, like when you're driving and a car swerves into your lane. Your stomach drops before your brain even has time to process the danger. That's what seeing those numbers felt like. $2,000 for the non-compliant structure. That was the initial sting. But below it was the real venom. A community safety enhancement special assessment for $15,000. The line item description was vague, something about addressing critical infrastructure risks. My shed, apparently, was a critical risk that required the financial equivalent of a new car to mitigate. Total due, $17,000. Payable within 30 days. I leaned back in my chair, the worn leather creaking in protest. 17 grand for a shed full of water bottles and bandages for kids. It wasn't a fine, it was an eviction notice written in dollar signs. They weren't trying to get me to comply. They were trying to break me, to make it so financially painful that I'd either hand them the keys to my house or just walk away and let them pick the bones clean. Here's the thing about data. It doesn't lie, but people who present it, they lie all the time. And this was a lie wrapped in the language of accounting. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the Homeowners Association's treasurer, a man named Peterson. He was a nervous little accountant who always looked like he'd just misplaced a very important decimal point. He picked up on the fourth ring. "Treasury," Peterson speaking. He mumbled, his voice thin and reedy. "Peterson, it's Alex Evans. I just got your email." There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of him swallowing. "Ah, yes, Mr. Evans. Unfortunate business, that." "Unfortunate? $15,000 for safety enhancement? What, are you gold-plating the fire hydrants?" My voice was colder than I intended. It was a board decision, Mr. Evans," he stammered. "A majority vote, for the good of the community. Your structure was identified as a primary liability in the new fire safety audit." "The audit performed by Vince, I assume." Another pause. "Vince is our certified contractor, yes." "So, the man who gets paid to demolish my shed is the same man who declared it unsafe. You don't see a slight conflict of interest there, Peterson." I could almost picture him sweating, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. "The board approved it," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. It was his shield, his mantra. "It's all in the bylaws. You can submit an appeal in writing, of course." "Oh, I will," I said, my voice dropping. "And Peterson, tell the board that $17,000 buys a lot of scrutiny. I'm very good at scrutinizing." I hung up before he could respond. The line about an appeal was a joke, and we both knew it. I spent the next hour digging through the Homeowners Association's website. It was a masterpiece of deliberate obstruction. The appeals page led to a broken link. The documents section contained bylaws from 10 years ago. I found a generic email address for inquiries and sent a detailed message challenging the fine and the assessment. 30 seconds later, I got an automated reply. "Thank you for your message. We will respond within 15-20 business days." 15 to 20 business days. They'd have torn down the shed and sold the scrap metal by then. I felt a cold knot of anger and helplessness tighten in my gut. Have you ever been caught in a system like that? One where the rules are a maze, and every door you open just leads to another locked one? It's designed to make you give up, to exhaust you into compliance. I got up and walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I turned on the tap. A weak, sputtering stream trickled out, coughing and spitting air. I frowned. The water pressure had been fine this morning. I twisted the handle all the way, but the flow didn't change. It was barely enough to fill the glass. I stood there for a moment, the lukewarm water swirling at the bottom of the glass. It was a small thing, a simple annoyance, but my gut told me something different. The server key in my pocket felt heavier, the notice on the shed, the email with its impossible numbers, and now this. It wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just a financial attack anymore. They were moving from paper to pipes. They were starting to turn the screws, literally. And as I looked out the kitchen window, I saw him. Vince, parked in his truck at the far end of the street, just watching my house. He wasn't even trying to hide. He was sending a message. Vince just sat there, his silhouette a dark shape behind the grimy windshield of his truck. He wasn't doing anything, just existing, a fat, smirking gargoyle perched at the edge of my world. After a few minutes, he started his engine and slowly drove away. The message was delivered. We can reach into your home, we control the water, we control the rules. What are you going to do about it? I walked outside, my bare feet burning on the flagstones of the patio. The air was thick and still, like the whole world was holding its breath. The main water shutoff valve for my property was near the street, covered by a small, rectangular plastic lid set into the scorched lawn. I pried it open with a screwdriver. The brass valve handle, which should have been fully open, was turned about a quarter of the way toward closed. Someone had been here. They hadn't shut it off completely. That would be too obvious. They'd just throttled it. A subtle act of strangulation. It was deniable. Plausible deniability is the grease that keeps the wheels of the petty tyrants turning. Oh, the pressure's low. Must be old pipes. Happens all the time in this neighborhood. I turned the valve back to its fully open position and went back inside. The kitchen faucet now roared to life with a satisfying blast. It was a small victory, but it felt hollow. This was an escalation, a move from bureaucratic harassment to physical sabotage. And it was working. I felt a prickle of something that wasn't quite fear, but its close cousin: isolation. The next day, a man in a crisp new polo shirt with a V-Construct logo embroidered on the chest knocked on my door. He was young, nervous, and held a clipboard like it was a shield. "Sir, I'm from the Homeowners Association's inspection team," he said, avoiding my eyes. "We've had reports of water pressure irregularities. I need to inspect your internal plumbing." "Let me guess," I said. "You're going to find my pipes are old and a hazard to the community." He flinched. I have to follow the procedure, sir." "Get off my property," I said, my voice quiet but firm. He scurried away like a startled rabbit. 2 hours later, another email landed in my inbox. Another fine, this time for obstructing a mandatory safety inspection. $500. The numbers were just piling up, a digital wall they were building around me, brick by brick. I needed allies, or at least, I needed information. That afternoon, I went to see Maria. Maria was a retired librarian who lived 3 houses down. She was in her late 70s, with eyes that had seen everything in this neighborhood for the last 50 years and forgotten none of it. She was the unofficial analog search engine of our community. I found her on her porch, surrounded by pots of wilting geraniums, methodically sipping iced tea. "Alex," she said, her voice like dry leaves rustling, "you look like you've been wrestling with demons." "Just the Homeowners Association," I said, sinking into the wicker chair opposite her. "It's the same thing." I told her everything: the shed, the fines, Vince, the water valve. She listened patiently, her gaze never leaving my face. When I finished, she took a slow sip of her tea. "Peterson," she said, setting the glass down with a soft click. "The treasurer. He's the key." "He seems like a puppet," I said, "a nervous wreck." "Nervous men are the most dangerous, Alex. They're afraid of being found out." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "He became treasurer 2 years ago. And you know what started happening? Special assessments. Before him, we had one in 10 years after that big hailstorm. With him, we've had 4. Landscaping beautification, road surface repair, community portal upgrade, and now this. Safety enhancement." She got up and went inside, returning a moment later with a stack of old stapled newsletters, the kind printed on cheap paper that turned yellow after a week. She laid them out on the small table between us. "These are the old community bulletins. Look at the budgets. Before Peterson, everything was itemized, clear. After he took over," she tapped a page from a year ago, "it became general funds, big, round numbers with no explanations. It was right there in faded black and white, a pattern. A trail of breadcrumbs leading from clear accounting to a swamp of vague, inflated costs. This wasn't just about my shed. This was a long-running scam. "He's skimming," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "He and Vince, they invent a project, inflate the cost, and pocket the difference." "Of course," Maria said, "but proving it is another matter. Peterson is a coward, but he's not stupid. The paper trail will be clean." She looked me in the eye. "But you don't look at paper, do you, Alex? You look at data." As I was leaving, a young man was jogging down the street. He saw me and slowed to a walk, his face etched with concern. It was Ben, a kid who worked for the county's code enforcement office. He was a stickler for rules, but a good person. He'd helped me with the permits for the shed in the first place, made sure everything was up to spec. He pulled out his earbuds. "Hey Alex, I heard what the Homeowners Association is doing. That's insane. That shed is built better than my house." "Tell them that," I said with a grim smile. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting Vince's truck to appear. "Look, I can't get officially involved. It's an internal Homeowners Association matter," he said, his voice low. "But the contractor they're using, this Vince guy, he's a ghost. I ran his company name through our system. It's called V-Construct LLC. It was registered a month ago to a P.O. box. It's a shell, a complete fiction." He gave me a final sympathetic look and started jogging again. V-Construct LLC. It wasn't much. But in my line of work, a name is a thread. And sometimes if you pull on a thread hard enough, the whole world unravels. I felt the first spark of something that wasn't anger or despair. It was the old familiar thrill of the hunt. They had made a mistake. They had left a digital footprint. That thread, V-Construct LLC, was all I needed. That night, my desk wasn't the office of a freelance consultant. It was the command center of a digital ghost hunter. The air was still and hot. The only sound the hum of my computer and the frantic chirping of crickets outside my window. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a predator. OSINT, open source intelligence, is a fancy term for a simple art. Finding needles in the world's biggest haystack. It's about knowing where to look and how to connect the dots that no one else sees. A company name, a P.O. box. To most people, it's a dead end. To me, it was a doorway. I started with the state's corporate registry. Ben was right. V-Construct LLC was registered 32 days ago. The registered agent was a generic online service, another dead end. But the filing documents had a digital signature, a time stamp. I cross-referenced the timestamp with public DNS records. The IP address used to file the documents wasn't from the anonymous registration service. It was a residential IP, registered to an internet service provider in our county, a sloppy mistake. It took me another 2 hours of methodical, patient work, cross-referencing breached data from old marketing websites and forum databases. People reuse passwords. They reuse usernames. They leave digital breadcrumbs everywhere they go. And Peterson, our nervous treasurer, was no exception. I found an old account he'd used on a home improvement forum years ago, asking for advice on a leaky faucet. The username was a combination of his wife's name and their anniversary year. The email he used for that forum was the same one linked to a cloud storage account, and that account wasn't properly secured. It wasn't a hack. I didn't break any laws. I just walked through a door he'd left wide open. Inside, I found it. Not financial records, nothing so obvious. I found a folder labeled Project Proposals. It contained dozens of Word documents, bids and quotes from V-Construct LLC for jobs around our neighborhood. Inflated quotes for fence repairs, exorbitant costs for tree trimming and the crown jewel, a proposal for community-wide fire safety retrofitting. The metadata in the documents told the real story. The author of every single one, Peterson. He wasn't just skimming. He was the ghost in the machine. He was V-Construct. Vince was just the face, the muscle, the guy with the truck. I felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind of high that comes with cracking a code. I had them. I printed everything, the corporate filings, the IP address traces, the authorship data from the documents. I had a neat little package of digital dynamite. The next morning, I posted it, not on the public town forum, but in the private moderated Homeowners Association residents group on social media. I laid it all out, coolly and factually, the shell company, the P.O. box, the documents authored by Peterson. I didn't make accusations. I just presented the data and asked the question, does anyone else find this strange? I expected questions. I expected shock. Maybe even a few messages of support. What I got was a digital firestorm. The first comment appeared within a minute. It was from one of the board members. "This is an outrageous and libelous attack on a dedicated community volunteer." Then another, "My cousin is a lawyer, and this is slander. You better be prepared for a lawsuit, Mr. Evans." Then the floodgates opened. People I'd known for years, people I'd shared a beer with at neighborhood barbecues, turned on me. "Leave Peterson alone. He's a good man." "Are you trying to destroy our neighborhood?" "You're just bitter about the fine for your illegal bunker." It was a coordinated attack. Vince and the board must have had their cronies primed and ready. They weren't refuting the data. They were attacking the messenger. Within an hour, my post was buried under an avalanche of angry comments. My carefully constructed case was dismissed as the ravings of a disgruntled homeowner with a grudge. But the real blow came later. I had a few freelance gigs lined up, small contracts that kept the lights on. That afternoon, I got an email from a client I had worked with for over a year. "Alex," it read, "I'm sorry, but we have to terminate our contract. We can't be associated with the kind of public controversy you're involved in. We've seen the reviews." Reviews? I logged onto the freelance platform where I got most of my work. My 5-star rating, meticulously built over 3 years, was gone. In its place were a dozen 1-star reviews, all posted in the last hour. Unprofessional, unreliable, creates conspiracy theories. They were all anonymous, of course, a bot farm attack. It was brutally efficient. My professional reputation was being torched. I lost 2 more clients by the end of the day. The $17,000 assessment felt like a distant memory. Now, I was watching my ability to earn a living evaporate in real time. Have you ever felt like you're in a boxing match and your opponent has a dozen arms? Every time you block one punch, 3 more land. I wasn't just losing the fight, I was being dismantled. They weren't just coming from my shed anymore. They were coming from my life. I sat in the dark, my screen casting a cold blue light on my face. The server key felt like a lump of ice in my pocket. I had tried to fight them with data, with logic. But I had made a critical mistake. I had assumed the truth mattered. The truth didn't matter. Not when you were up against fear and greed. My digital dynamite had fizzled out, and all I'd managed to do was paint a giant target on my own back. My income was choked off, my reputation was in flames, and I was the neighborhood pariah. I was completely, utterly alone. The weight of that isolation was a physical thing. It settled in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I even started to second-guess myself. Was I crazy? Was I the one who was paranoid, seeing conspiracies where there was only incompetence? That's the most insidious part of a gaslighting campaign. It doesn't just make other people doubt you, it makes you doubt yourself. For a couple of days, I did nothing. I just sat with the silence, watching the fines pile up in my inbox, watching the dust gather on my desk. The water pressure was fine, but it felt like the air in my own home was getting thin. Vince's truck was a constant presence now, parked down the street for hours at a time, a silent, grinning vulture waiting for me to keel over. The Monday demolition date loomed. Then, one evening, there was a knock on my back door. It was Maria, the retired librarian. She held a covered casserole dish in her hands. "You look terrible, Alex," she said, bypassing any pleasantries as she walked into my kitchen. "Figured you weren't eating." She set the dish on the counter. The rich smell of baked ziti filled the room. It was the first thing I'd smelled besides dust and stale coffee in days. "It's over, Maria," I said, my voice flat. I showed them the proof, and they crucified me for it. "Of course they did," she said, pulling 2 plates from my cupboard. "You tried to fight a fire with a spreadsheet. This isn't about numbers, Alex. It's about what people are afraid to lose. Their property values, their sense of safety, their comfortable little lives. Peterson and Vince aren't selling them anything but fear, and it's a bestseller." I slumped into a kitchen chair. "So what's the answer? They're going to tear down the shed on Monday. They've ruined my career. I'll have to sell the house." Maria put a plate of ziti in front of me. It was steaming. "The answer," she said, "is that you're an analyst. You analyze supply chains. You've been looking at the wrong supply chain." She tapped her temple with a finger. "You've been tracking the money, the data. That's invisible, ethereal. You need to track something solid, something people can see and touch." I stared at her, not understanding. "What are you talking about?" "Vince," she said. "He's a contractor. He builds things, or rather, he pretends to. He charges for expensive, high-quality materials and uses cheap junk. That's the core of the scam. The money he and Peterson steal isn't just invented. It's the difference between what they claim to buy and what they actually use." A flicker of the old fire returned. Of course, it was a classic procurement scam, the oldest trick in the book. But how do I prove that? I asked. I can't get access to his invoices, his warehouse. You don't need to, Maria said, a sly smile playing on her lips. Vince is lazy, and he's cheap. He wouldn't pay for a secure warehouse. He'd use a public storage unit, and he's also arrogant. He's been putting cheap, flammable siding on houses in this neighborhood for 2 years, charging people for the fire retardant and top-of-the-line stuff. I looked at her, the gears in my head finally starting to turn again. The fog of defeat was beginning to lift. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a brawler. I was a man who traced things from point A to point B. And Maria had just handed me a new map. But just as that spark of hope ignited, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You think you're smart, don't you, old man? Monday is coming. Maybe we'll start with the shed. Maybe we'll start with the house. Accidents happen in this heat. I felt the blood drain from my face. This was no longer just about fines and sabotage. This was a direct threat. I showed the phone to Maria. Her smile vanished. They're getting desperate, she said, her voice grim. That means you're getting close. That night, sleep was impossible. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I sat at my desk, the old server key in my hand. It was a symbol of my last failure, a reminder of the cost of telling the truth. I had tried to expose a flaw in a system, and the system had crushed me. I had tried to do it again, and the system was crushing me again. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, looking out at the darkened street. I remembered my father, a quiet mechanic who could diagnose an engine problem just by listening to it. He once told me, "Son, if a machine is broken, you can't argue with it. You can't reason with it. You have to find the part that's lying, and you have to show everyone how it fails." And then I knew. The documents were a lie. The numbers were a lie. The reviews were a lie. I had to find the one thing they couldn't fake, the one thing that would fail, spectacularly and publicly, right in front of everyone's eyes. It was time to stop arguing with the machine. It was time to give it a stress test. The plan began to form, not as a complex diagram, but as a single, clear image. A flame, a small, controlled flame, and a piece of Vince's cheap, fraudulent material. It was brilliantly simple. You can argue with a document, you can dismiss a data point, but you can't argue with fire. First, I needed a sample. Getting it was risky, but necessary. Under the cover of a moonless night, I slipped out of my house. The air was still thick with the day's heat. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. I felt like a spy in my own neighborhood. I made my way to a house 2 streets over, one of the first to get the siding upgrade from V-Construct 2 years ago. The owner was on vacation. Behind the house, near the air conditioning unit, was a pile of leftover construction debris the owner had never cleaned up. Among the wood scraps and empty paint cans, I found what I was looking for. A 2-foot-long offcut of the siding Vince had installed. It was light, flimsy. It felt more like a plastic toy than a building material. I tucked it under my arm and slipped back into the shadows, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Back in my garage, I looked at the piece of siding. It was my smoking gun. Now I needed a stage, and I knew exactly where it would be. The flyer had been in my mailbox for a week, a glossy announcement for the annual Community Safety Fair, sponsored by the Homeowners Association. It was Peterson and Vince's victory lap, a public relations stunt to celebrate their own manufactured crisis and solution. It was scheduled for Saturday, 2 days before the planned demolition of my shed. The star of the show, according to the flyer, would be Vince himself, giving a live demonstration of the latest in fire-retardant home protection technology. It was perfect. They were building their own gallows. The next step was to get an authentic certified fire-retardant panel to compare it with. This was easier. A quick search led me to a building supply wholesaler in the next county. I drove out the next morning and paid cash for a single certified Class A fire-rated siding panel. The difference was stunning. It was heavy, dense, with a fibrous, almost chalky texture. It felt real. It felt safe. I had the props. I had the stage. Now, I needed to make sure everyone would be watching. I spent the next day not on the computer, but on the phone. I called the local fire marshal's office. I didn't give my name. I just said I was a concerned resident and had a question about the fire rating of materials being used in a local development. I mentioned V-Construct's name and the upcoming safety fair. I planted a seed of curiosity. Then I called Ben, the kid from the code enforcement office. I told him what I was planning. I didn't ask for his help, just for him to be there. "I can't participate, Alex," he said, his voice tense. "But I can be a witness, and I can bring my code book." Finally, I made one more call. I found a public record of the shipping manifest for a container that had arrived at the port a month ago. The contents were listed as plastic decorative sheets from an overseas manufacturer. The consignee, the person who took delivery, wasn't V-Construct LLC. It was a holding company that, after 3 more layers of corporate shells, was owned by Peterson's wife. I had found the source of Vince's cheap siding. It wasn't just substandard, it was imported under a false declaration. I sent an anonymous tip to the Customs Enforcement Agency. The wheels of federal bureaucracy turned slowly, but I didn't need them to act. I just needed them to start looking. Saturday arrived, hot and bright. The park was filled with families, bouncy castles, and the smell of hot dogs and sunscreen. In the center of it all was a small stage. Vince stood there, basking in the attention, a microphone in his hand. Next to him was a display board with samples of his fire-safe siding. Peterson stood at the side of the stage, looking smug, accepting handshakes from smiling residents. I waited in the crowd, the 2 pieces of siding, Vince's flimsy plastic and the real, certified panel, hidden in a large canvas bag at my feet. In my pocket, along with my server key, was a simple butane torch, the kind you use for plumbing. My hands were sweating. This was it. No more hiding behind a screen, no more digital ghosts. This was real. Vince launched into his speech, his voice booming through the cheap speakers. "Your home is your castle, and in these dangerous times, you need to protect it from the greatest threat of all, fire." He held up a piece of his siding. "This isn't just siding, folks. This is a shield. This is peace of mind. This material is virtually indestructible. It's so safe, you could hold a blowtorch to it, and it wouldn't catch." The crowd murmured in appreciation. Peterson beamed. You know that moment in a movie right before everything changes? The hero takes a deep breath, steps out of the shadows, and the whole world holds its breath with him. I took a deep breath. My heart was a hammer against my ribs. This was either going to be the moment I took my life back or the moment I lost it for good. I picked up my bag and started walking toward the stage. I stepped out of the crowd and walked directly toward the stage. 100 conversations stopped. 100 heads turned. The sudden silence was a physical force. Vince paused mid-sentence, his smile faltering as he saw me approaching. Peterson's face went pale. "You said you could hold a blowtorch to it, Vince," I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying easily in the sudden quiet. "I didn't need a microphone. I'd like to see that." I reached the edge of the stage and placed my canvas bag on the ground. From it, I pulled the 2 panels, the flimsy, lightweight piece of his siding and the dense, heavy certified panel. I held them up, one in each hand. "I have 2 samples here," I announced to the crowd. "One is a certified Class A fire retardant panel that meets all state and federal fire codes. The other is a piece of siding from a home right here in our neighborhood. The kind you've been installing, Vince." Vince tried to recover, forcing a laugh. "Hey, buddy, I'm a little busy here. This is a private event." He motioned to a couple of burly guys from his crew who started moving toward me. "Is it, Vince?" I said, not taking my eyes off him. "Because it looks like a public demonstration of product safety, and as a resident of this community, I have a vested interest in that." I pulled the small butane torch from my pocket. The crowd gasped. The 2 crew members froze, unsure what to do. "Let's put your claim to the test," I said. "A live test, right here, right now." I propped the certified panel against the stage steps. I clicked the igniter on the torch. A sharp blue flame hissed to life. I directed it at the panel. The surface blackened and smoked, a char spreading across the material. But it didn't burn. After 10 seconds, I pulled the flame away. The panel was scorched but intact. "This," I said, turning to the crowd, "is what safety looks like." Then I picked up Vince's siding. I propped it up in the same spot. The plastic felt slick and cheap under my fingers. "And this," I said, my voice dropping, "is what you've been paying for." I pointed the torch at the panel. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, the corner of the siding curled, turning black. A tiny lick of orange flame appeared, then another, and then, With a terrifying whoosh, the entire panel erupted in a geyser of fire. It didn't just burn, it melted, dripping flaming globs of molten plastic onto the grass, which immediately began to smolder. A thick, choking column of greasy black smoke billowed into the clear blue sky. People screamed. They scrambled backward, knocking over chairs. The smell was acrid, chemical, the smell of a toxic fire. I dropped the burning panel and stomped it out with my shoe, my heart hammering. In the stunned, horrified silence that followed, I turned to face Vince and Peterson. Vince stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. Peterson looked like he was about to faint. "You weren't just overcharging us," I said, my voice ringing with an authority I didn't know I had. "You were turning our homes into death traps. You sold people safety, but what you delivered was kindling." Then I played my final card. I pulled out my phone. I didn't have any secret recording. I just brought up the shipping manifest I'd found, the one listing plastic decorative sheets delivered to Peterson's wife's holding company. "This is the bill of lading for the materials you've been using," I said, holding it up for everyone to see. They weren't declared as building materials because they're not. They're illegal, unrated plastic, and U.S. Customs is very interested in that. That was the final blow. The crowd, my neighbors who had scorned and insulted me just days before, turned on them. The anger was visceral, a wave of betrayal and fury. "You put that on my house," a man yelled. "My kids sleep there." Just then, two figures emerged from the back of the crowd. One was the local fire marshal, his face grim. The other was Ben, the code inspector, holding his official code book. The game was over. In the end, there was no dramatic trial. Vince and Peterson were arrested on the spot. The investigation that followed uncovered the entire scam, leading to federal charges for fraud and smuggling. The Homeowners Association was disbanded, its charter revoked by the state. My name was cleared. The clients I'd lost came back apologetic, with more work than I could handle. But here's the thing about winning a war. You still have to live on the battlefield. I had a choice. A lawyer approached me, told me I could lead a class action lawsuit that would make me a rich man. It was tempting. The easy path, revenge. But as I stood on my lawn, looking at my little shed, the shed that started it all, I thought about something else. I thought about my neighbors who had been lied to, cheated, and put in danger. Suing them for the Homeowners Association's sins felt wrong. It felt like another kind of poison. So I chose a different path. I used my skills not to sue, but to solve. I organized community meetings. I found a real honest contractor. I used my OSINT skills to audit the new bids, making sure every dollar was accounted for. We rebuilt our community, not with lawyers, but with trust. We replaced the toxic siding, panel by panel. My shed still stands. It's got a new official sign on it now from the school district, thanking me for my service to the community. I won, but I lost something too. I lost my anonymity. I lost my quiet life. I'm not just Alex the analyst anymore. I'm Alex, the guy who burned the siding, the guy who took on the board and won, the guy people come to when they have a problem. Sometimes, late at night, I hold that old, useless server key in my hand. It's no longer a reminder of failure. It's a reminder that sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to find its